As a former CPO of Anglo American and Royal Phillips, Neil Deverill was in a good position to offer his take on procurement's development. I asked him what he saw as being the largest change in recent years.
I think you can split it into two camps, the informed and the uninformed. The informed, the changes have been quite significant, and by informed I mean leaders, the leaders of procurement today. There is far more market testing of what is done internally and externally and subsequently outsourcing. There is far more involvement in M&A, and there's a significant increase in the level of contribution that the knowledgeable CPOs, the best CPOs, add to the business plans. So at the top end, we see procurement far more engaged with business rather than just with procurement. If you go down to the bottom end of procurement, I would say very little has changed.
I suppose there's been, at that top end, where there has been an improvement, how much has that been sort of driven by economic forces during the recession, a lot of an onus being placed on cost cutting, and how much has it been driven by, say, pioneering individuals?
I think economics will always have, the economic conditions will always have some impact on it, but I think I'd rather characterize it as competition. There's no coincidence that in the 70s and 80s, the US automotive industry were streets ahead in leading procurement practices because of the levels of competition that existed within that sector. And I think as you've seen competition ripple through across other sectors, that in itself, I think, is the single biggest contributor to shifting procurement's competence and performance up through the gears. What I would also say is there has been a very odd occurrence of fortuitous pairing of CEOs who have an open mind and people who become very good and competent CPOs. And I've seen that happen several times where it's almost a surprise that the result is such a good business procurement activity, but it wasn't planned. It was fortuitous, and indeed the CPO in question wasn't a CPO professionally. They were somebody that came in, knew how to make procurement really work on a business basis. And then following that, I've seen more enlightened CEOs and to some extent CFOs, but I think still a lot of work to be done on the CFO side, playing a me too, where either they've experienced it in one company and moved to another and repeated, or they've looked over the fence and seen what's going on in a competitor's organization and said, I'll have some of that too. So I think competition, economic climate to some extent, and also a learning process of open-minded CEOs.
You mentioned the CFO side. How do you think that relationship has developed over the years?
Well, I think there are some inherent problems with CFOs as a genre. By nature, many CFOs that I've met are numbers people, not people. They have a tendency to focus on control and cut in terms of costs rather than look for business opportunities and grow value. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a CFO. They might be a CEO. And so I think there's an inherent issue there where many CFOs can't think in the right mode to encourage procurement to grow, and therefore they stifle it to some extent. And I think that's you can observe it in many different companies today.
So from procurement's perspective, how much is it at the moment a case of needing the opportunities from the business in order to grow and develop as a function? How much is it a case of them having to learn and do their own thing to progress?
This is a very good topic for me. I have very strong opinions about this, and they stem from the my belief that the best will always rise to the top. So in a way, I find the question a little bit a non-question, in that organizations that invest open-mindedly in very high caliber people will see those people rise through the business and take, if it's procurement that we're talking about, take procurement to a business level, because their peers recognize their value and their executive recognizes that these people have another job after procurement, in which case they become a much more valued proposer of business opportunities, rather than a journeyman procurement leader who may never go above a head of procurement role and who's plugging away at procurement issues rather than raising their thought levels to business strategy and business propositions. And the caliber makes the difference. So when a CEO or a board accept that they want somebody of significantly larger caliber coming into procurement to make a difference, they will make a difference, because they will, one, be able to, and two, be supported by the regime to make the difference, because that's an invested person. So it's a virtuous circle.
With that in mind, Neil, I mean, what do you think today's procurement executives struggle with most? I mean, where do you think's the most room for improvement?
I think in getting the big picture. There is the concept of Procurement 2.0, which I like very much, which I interpret as being procurement at an organization, an enterprise level, rather than procurement at a procurement level. And I think there are many CPOs today who haven't made that jump in their mind to business strategy, and therefore how to position the business to go to the market, the procurement, the supply market, just as you would in marketing, going to the customer market, then you go to the supply market, but the business does that as an entity. And so when procurement leaders, CPOs today, can't get that big picture, they don't stand a chance of convincing the rest of the organization that this is a strategy that'll pay off. So it just doesn't go anywhere, because they're the only ones that can make it go, because nobody else has got that picture either. And it's in the responsibility of procurement to paint that picture, market it, and sell it to the rest of the organization.
Along those lines, what sort of obstacles do you think are there beyond what procurement can control? What sort of obstacles are there that might be stand in the way of procurement better aligning itself with the business?
Well, let me come back to the first obstacle, which is the vicious circle, really, of incompetent CPOs. Because if you have an incompetent CPO in post, they are unable to paint the large picture for their executive, who therefore don't know there's a big picture necessarily, because you don't get up in the morning and think, oh, well, there's a great opportunity here. Therefore, they don't invest in better procurement people. Therefore, you get what you already had. So, first of all, there's that vicious circle which runs today in many companies. And the other issue, it still comes back to competence, but it's procurement is competing inside the organization for investment, for funds, for attention, for capacity from the organization. And unless it realizes that it is competing, and therefore it must put business propositions together, it must be very clear in marketing the opportunities for the business, then it won't go anywhere. So it is understanding the size of the opportunity, being able to compete with marketing, with engineering, with legal, all the other organizations who want a share of the available funding to make a difference. Unless they realize that and up their game, that's the biggest obstacle, I think.
And do you think there's enough knowledge sharing? Does procurement talk to procurement enough in terms of learning how it can address these problems?
I think procurement talks to procurement a lot. Does procurement talk about the right things? I suspect not. And again, because there's a gulf, a chasm between the mainstream CPOs who are doing a good job and the business level thinking and the tomorrow's business leaders who can indeed come from being involved with the procurement. They could go on to being a business leader, but to make that jump, the mainstream procurement leaders really need to be talking about how can we position the company, how can we position the enterprise, how can we maneuver our organization to compete, not just procurement, but the whole organization to compete with the other guys with whom we're competing on a business level anyway. And one, how can we do that? Two, how can we sell it internally? And how can we sustain it? When you start talking about those concepts and those issues, then there's a whole different conversation you can have. One, with peer and senior management, and two, with the executive, because they'll let you do it if you've got the cojones to go and do it, but many of them don't.
Absolutely. Lots to think about there. Thank you very much, Neil.
Oh, you're welcome.